let's always challenge words that don't seem appropriate. I welcome that at any time, and I'll try and make sure I don't use those words if they're not appropriate. So tricky times, I think, call for more powerful questions. And I think we heard some great examples about that earlier on, which we're going to kind of talk on. And part of the framing for that, there's a lot of work that I've just been appointed onto the board of Natural Resources Wales, which you must be aware is the new organisation coming together that brings together CCW, Environment Agency and Forestry Commission. I currently sit on the board of Countryside Council for Wales. And one of the things that we've been really wrestling with is that there's two ways of looking at the problems. And the old way of looking at this is what you might be able to call the single concept, which is when people used to sit in different offices and tick the little boxes on their relative orders of duty, their priorities. And people whose job it was to look after economic development, judges would look after economic development. And the CPI are happy with anything to do with economic development as long as we can create jobs at any cost. Broadly. So lower the standards to make it easy to do business. So lower the thresholds, lower the tariff on the bridge, or do whatever we do to get businesses here. The people whose job it is to look after society, social care of the elderly, young people, do that without any connection to economy or environment. And the people who look after environment kind of do that without thinking about jobs or people, because I'm only interested in trees, lichen and stuff like that. And I suppose what's changed is that it's taken a long while, and people would say there's a species, any species that took 2,000 years to put wheels on a suitcase. Isn't that right? Do any of you remember that going on holiday? Carrying suitcases. It's quite an indictment, isn't it? Where we got to. In the same way that it takes a long while to learn different things about something. And there's now what you might call a triple context about solving this thing, which is realizing it's no longer about one or the other, about, no, this is my budget, this is yours, about different things, but about recognizing we have to solve things at the same time. And that the way that we solve problems in the economy have to be the same as the way we solve challenges in society, and to do so in a way that actually maintains us within living, thriving ecosystems on which we depend for doing business. And part of the problem with that, some of you will be aware that there's a framing in the Welsh Government. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and assuming you're fairly literate on this, and if not, we can send more information through, that we're running our economy at the minute on the idea that we have unlimited natural resources. And that if everyone else on our economy depends on the rest of the world essentially copying what we do, so we can sell more fridges, cars, whatever else around the world. And the way that runs at the minute is if everyone lived like us, we'd need just under 3 planets with resources to sustain us. And the problem is, God damn it, is no matter where we look, we can't find another planet that's got them all. And there's no word yet come back from Mars, depending on what they report in December, that's going to suggest that that's going to be that easy. So we're running an economy that doesn't work in terms of stacking up what we're taking out. And part of the thing that's going to be coming through with that, with Natural Resources Wales as it comes online, is starting to put a value on our ecosystems. How do we put a value on clean rivers, lakes, trees, countryside, fertile soils, clean air, in terms of health and well-being, so it can become part of the decision-making process? Puma, the international sportswear company, were the first big business in the world to put a price on the damage they did to nature. They don't pay it, so it's currently an unassigned debt of 134 million euros last year. That's what they would pay if they did what we might call full price accounting. So in addition, and this is the good news, okay, there's in addition to everything that Pete talked about, there's a whole bunch of other costs that don't even figure in the budget yet. They will come back. On top of that stuff, how many people in the room think that energy price is going to go down by more than 10% in the next few years? And if you had hands up to say how many people think, we're not experts, but based on what we've seen, how many people think that energy might go up by 30% in the next 3 to 5 years? We don't know, but it could be in that territory. Food price is likely to kind of go up at the same rate. Raw materials at the same rate. Shortages of some of this stuff. So it's a pretty uncertain space that we're living in. So the question we want to be asking is, taking all that into account, how do we focus our efforts? And back to this one earlier on. From this model, yeah, we can focus our efforts on just doing what the law requires, which is the legal minimum, which is usually the political maximum, because as a politician or as a representative, it's often hard to lobby for more than the law requires, because you haven't got the backup to deliver it. Yeah, we can look at that. So, what does the law require in terms of, for instance, the social contract that you give to any businesses that you support through your economic development process? What does law require in terms of that? Dim. Nothing. Yeah, the law requires nothing. Or the law requires very low environmental standards. Now, we could push the boat and get 10 out of 10 on the rules-based scale and successfully reach the wrong goals. A great example of this would be the sales of lipstick in America. I don't wear lipstick that often in public. But lipstick, because it isn't a food, doesn't need to be tested for human consumption. So 80% of the chemicals in lipstick in the States have never ever been tested on humans. But it's legal. You could ask to say, how do you measure ambulance times? What's the normal measure for ambulance times? What's the unit of measurement for ambulance success? It's minutes, 8 minutes. Why is it 8 minutes? Because someone says, but it's better than 9. Now, if you've had a coronary, what would you want the measure to be?
0.
Do I live?
No, an hour.
An hour?
That was an hour, that's the golden hour.
Yeah, under an hour. And yet the holy grail space is to say, how do we keep people alive when they've had accidents? When they've fallen ill quickly? Which is why we ended up with ambulances at roundabouts and crossroads and in car parks, because that was the average place where they were likely to go respond best. Rather than actually starting to understand where people are likely to get sick. So you then you put paramedics in shopping centres or football grounds or whatever, so you can respond within 90 seconds. Type stuff. So we can set successfully strong goals. Or down here, we can have good intentions but low impact. And this is what you might call tree hugger land. I used to spend a lot of time in that area. This is kind of old school activist land. We have a really good understanding of a small part of the jigsaw, but didn't do communications, weren't an engineer, never understood processes, didn't understand marketing, finance, budgets, social media, or how to make change happen. So you only understand a little bit of they can be very good at lobbying. They have a lot of wants, perhaps as opposed to needs. And up here in the top right is what we call the real 10 out of 10, or R10 for short, which is to say, doing what's needed based on what you think is going to happen, rather than the other two. And this is a different space to incremental change. And we have choices about decisions to make about where we focus our effort. So if we think that energy prices might go up by 20 to 30% in the next few years, and we could do some research to check that out, does it make sense that we plan our service delivery around them? Say. Or we could do the incremental through a couple of pence a litre would be okay. Or do we focus the service delivery on what we think is going to happen around energy prices, around flow? And I mean, this week's news, Wales, Cornwall, North Wales, 2 weeks ago, New York. This is not unusual stuff anymore. So what do we plan our service delivery around? Either what the law requires or what's needed. So in the work I'm doing through the WRJ with a colleague, Alan Netherwood, Alan is doing some fantastic work based on the legal requirements around adaptation. So this is helping local authorities get their heads around what happens if you work on the government target around climate change, global warming, which is 2 degrees. So what happens to your road infrastructure when things get hotter? What happens to your floods and so on? The fact that no scientists in senior government are saying that's where the temperature's going to go to is irrelevant, because the temperature forecast now, within our lifetimes, is 2.8. So we're not actually working on what we think is reality. And the space we want to talk about, I suppose, is recognising, please.
You know when you say increase 2.8, people really don't know what 2.8 means. So today's climate aware is where we're going to be. Is that like south of France, 2.8?
So in effect, what the risk, I suppose there's a risk profile in terms of temperatures that are forecast. And the UN was forecasting was saying that at a global level, an average temperature increase of 2 degrees, we could just about manage within. We lose some species, stuff changes, landscape changes, but we can cope with the shifts. The report came out from the UN, 2 reports 2 weeks ago from the UN and PwC, saying there's a 20% chance of a 4-degree rise in temperature. Not within our lifetime, that's not within our lifetimes, but by 2100. But at that level, Greenland melts. Not immediately, but it starts to melt, and then you start to put into place an irreversible series of changes. So 2 degrees is the kind of sensible threshold. So that basically what we're saying is that currently our target is set against the wrong space. And without going into the kind of detail of that now, it's about the level of risk that we choose to work with in terms of our decision making. And this isn't about kind of doing one or the other, but if you take that kind of framing about where those different things sit, that we have the civic centre and the policy and process that sits there is capable of setting the legislative framework and the policy and the strategy to deliver the other pieces. Big business has got the ability to make things happen. I was working earlier this year with Procter & Gamble. They've got 4 billion people use their products. They're talking about a goal, and we want to reach another 1 billion consumers with our products. But they have the ability to ship stuff, so we need to work out how does the best of business bring their skills into the county to make stuff happen. We've got at the same time to harness the power of community passion and networks that sit there and enable communities to create that radical space for change. So it's not about, for me, it's not about one or the other, but about how we do all of these to make things happen. Because trying to get corporates don't understand the community generally. Communities don't understand the corporate generally. This is about that engagement about different things. And as an idea developed by Dr. Otto Scharmer a couple of years ago called Theory U, because of the shape. There's nothing more complex than that. It just talks about the change process, that the first thing that we need to do is to be able to see the way we see the world. We need to become aware of the lenses through which we see things, aware of our mindsets, as you were talking about earlier on, and see how they filter stuff, to understand what the big picture is. And what's the big picture saying? Actually, it's not all okay, is it? Or whatever else it is. To get to a space that he talks about as presencing, which is being really present to the information on what's going on, to the voices of our community, and sensing what needs to happen. Looking around and kind of going, like that equivalent standing on top of a big hill to ask what needs to happen, and then getting that sense of vision and testing that vision, prototyping it before we embed it and make it work. And within that, you've seen some of this stuff before. Sometimes we see things that aren't there, like the black dots and the gaps in the square. They don't exist. So our eyes plays tricks on us sometimes, and we see things that aren't there. Other times, you've all seen this one before. You can all see both images. Yeah, old man, young man. And without spending a lot of time on this, there's an old man in the picture and a young man in the picture. And kind of quick hands up, who can see both? Okay, well, all right, just for 2 minutes, if you can see both, explain to someone near you where the images both are. Very quick, there's a very old man and a young man. If you can see both, explain to someone else where the pictures
That's his nose, right? I've seen this before actually. Yeah, the old man, that's his nose. That's the young man looking away.
Can you see it? Can you see the old man? The young man is looking off to this side, and his face is in kind of silhouette, and this is the young man's chin, and his nose, and his nose is in shadow. That's the back, that's the side of his eye. He's looking sideways like that, and you're seeing him from here. Yeah, like the kind of cowboy looking left. So if you look here, you take out that bit. See the old man. Okay, the old man. This is the old man's eye. His other eye, and he's got a big kind of body nose and mouth. He's wearing a scarf. So I'll send the slides around. But the point I want to make is that exactly the same data can mean different things to people in the room. Sometimes when we look at data, the stuff that Pete puts up, the information that Kelly puts up, we can be looking at exactly the same data and have completely different views about what it means. And even in a situation like this where we're trying to explain to each other from the same space exactly what's there, it's still hard to see it sometimes. So one of our key abilities, you got it?
No, it's not the young man now, it's just the old man.
I switched the slide when you weren't looking.
You lost the old man now.
Old man's eye, nose, and mouth. Okay. So the point to note is how easy it is to get distracted by different views, and so what we see, old man, young man, hoodie, versus creative person. Disinterested citizen as opposed to someone who hasn't been asked the right question. Whether we see a councillor's got no resources or a councillor's got 100,000 resources. Those are the kind of views that frame the questions that you ask. And I think it's just noticing that our mind, back to Kelly's point, our mind plays tricks on us about the way we see things, and to be able to take that bigger view, we've got to be prepared every now and again to take those labels off. We do an exercise sometimes with groups. There's a good one for Christmas, okay? It's a cheap entertainment for the Christmas table. And I can send it, we run an exercise sometimes. We get a bunch of labels that you can do with Christmas hats. Put labels on people's hat that they haven't seen. And we treat people according to what it says on the label. You can imagine how long does it take? Can you imagine how long it might take for people to take on the behaviour of the label that's on their head, even if they haven't seen it? How long might it take? 30 seconds or less, 10 seconds, 5 seconds. And the labels are things like, might say leader, expert, newcomer, comedian. Or you might have insignificant on someone's head. The comedian gets laughed at when they say anything. You could put insignificant on the most extrovert person in the group, and if everyone ignores them, they'll stop contributing within 20 seconds. It's great. Try it if there's anyone in the meeting that's been out of order. But the speed at which our perceptions influence our behaviour is astonishing. So being really aware of the framing that we put on that circumstance is so important. And what I want, and we're in charge of the frames that we put around things. And the frames we put around things filter the information we use to make decisions. So we could look at the data from earlier on and go, oh my God. And to what extent? If we don't do that, we don't understand the data. But the flip side of that is if we don't understand our creativity and our passion and what actually brings us to stand in this room today, why we put all of that highly paid time in to get to represent your life, you don't. Why is it that we put the time in to represent the communities we do? It's not for glory. Are they only doing it for the money? No, they're not. That kind of part of the process of engaging people to understand why you do what you do, because you love your part and you want to represent those communities. And then that information takes in. So the kind of questions that we want to be asking, we can ask about, how can we reduce the cost of school travel by 8.5% in 2013? Or whatever. I was working with Swansea on a question around transport. They had a £3 million taxi bill in Cardiff that was about taking statements of kids to school. And you can imagine the different people in charge of that. So this group here are responsible for getting the kids safely to school. This group here is responsible for looking after the drivers. This group here are responsible for getting the kids out of the house. No one actually said, well, actually, what do the kids want? The kids want to get out of school in a normal bus, so they're not stigmatised for having special needs. And the other kids want to make sure when they get to 18 that they know how to get around town unaccompanied, so they can go to job interviews. go on a training course, go to cinema. But that wasn't in the interest of any of these groups who were looking after them, looking after them. So not only did you have a £3 million taxi bill, no one had talked to the kids to find out what they want. And realised that the goal was about maximising travel independence by 18. Because at 18, no one gives a shit. But at 18, you shift into someone else, you shift into social services, and then it's a £10,000 a year cost of not having a job. It's going to be supported. And that's the kind of joint of thinking you perhaps ask. If you think about transformative thinking, you might, rather than say, how do we cut the transport bill by 8.5%, how do we combine travel education and our children's long-term well-being, using their resources to create better outcomes? Or whatever we ask, but it's not just about how we salami slice the budget. So my question to you is, based on the information you heard from Moyna, Pete, Kelly, and within your groups, what are the big questions that you need to be asking about what comes next? And I just want to kind of play with what are the biggest questions you need to get your head around. And I'm thinking about things like, what does engagement really look like? If it's about change that you've got to make in the way you work, what's that about? Is this about them or is this about us? Just have a kick around to say, if the question's not about 2.2%, but about bigger shifts, what might those questions be on the tables you've got? We'll take 10 minutes just to kick those around, no right answers. I just want to try and think of the most profound questions that you can think of that relate to the challenge ahead, not just in terms of the budget, but about the bigger picture of recognising this has got to deal with a whole lot of other issues at the same time. We'll do that for like 10 minutes, share that, and then see where we get to, and then we'll dive into the creative process.
Sure.
Afterwards, can I check any questions? Okay with that? We've got to 3 o'clock.